What up, everyone? So today we are going to talk about Justice League, the Snyder Cut. A few things I want to clear up though. One, I've been drinking a lot tonight. I've had way more to drink than I usually have when I make these videos. But I already committed to recording it this night and I didn't want to put it off. So I'm going to do the best I can even though I'm piss drunk. Something I wanted to mention about my channel and these videos in general is that one of my main focuses here is to get the community involved. From the very beginning, my videos were about helping the community, but it's also about engaging the community. So this is going to be a review, a movie review, but people often don't realize that I want the community involved. That's what one of my main focuses is going to be here. So I'm not just going to give my opinion and review of this movie. I want to hear yours as well. I want to hear it in the comments, and I want to start a discussion. Because most people, when they do these reviews, it's just about them, and it's just about listening to them. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But my videos are going to be different. I don't want you to just listen to me. I want to listen to you as well and start a conversation and engage, make it a two-way thing. And just the same, not between you and me, other people in the comments. Feel free to read their comments and engage them as well. Like get a conversation going, get a discussion going. That's what I want the main focus to be here. So don't be afraid to give your opinions in the comments. I only ever have one rule, and that is, be civil to each other. That's my only rule. You don't have to agree with me. You don't have to magically think everything I do. You can disagree. That's fine, but don't be a dick about it. Like, listen, we don't need to insult each other or anything like that. So those are my rules. So that's something I wanted to bring up because I think people have lost sight of that. Because at the end of the day, you really don't need my opinion. My opinion doesn't really matter that much. The movie's out there. You can watch it for yourself and make your own opinion. You don't need me to understand the movie. I'm just here to give my side of it so I can engage people that way. That's my way of involving the community, and that's what I want to do. That's what I want the focus to be. That being said, I will obviously give my opinion because there would be no discussion without giving my side of things. So we will talk about that, and I'll give an overall score and all that stuff, and that's where we'll go. So overall, Snyder Cut, better than I thought it was going to be. Not significantly, not blowing my mind or anything like that, but definitely better than I thought. Mostly in line in the sense that I don't think anyone thought that the movie was going to be worse by any means. I think everyone assumed it was going to be better than the original cut of Justice League, and it definitely was. And there was a lot of stuff they added into it. There was a lot of things that I wasn't expecting, and I like some of the direction they took in it. And I think this, I may be overstating here, but I think DC's finally kind of finding their niche in the market. For the longest time, DC was always trying to copy Marvel. They were trying to follow that cookie cutter thing that Marvel did, and I've said it from the beginning, that's a terrible idea. Don't do that. These people at Disney and Marvel are doing this a million times better than you ever will. Don't follow in their footsteps because you will lose. Imitation is suicide is a famous quote by Emerson. And it's true, because you can only get so far by copying someone. You need to make your own path instead of following in someone else's. So for so long they were trying to do that and trying to follow the Avengers thing and do it that way. And it's like, not that that's bad, not that you shouldn't do that, but you gotta do something different. And lately I've finally been seeing them do that. And I think the difference is between DC and Marvel, or at least it should be, this should be the focus, is that it's more adult. And what I mean by that is more adult themes, darker storylines, and now with the Justice League cut, I didn't realize it was going to be rated R, by the way, and I watched it, and it was. It had, a lot of violence, a lot of blood, and then swearing, obviously, and that's the one thing that they have an edge in the market, because that's the one thing that Disney and Marvel are not going to do. They've openly stated they're never going to do that. Now, I know what you're thinking. They got Deadpool 3 on the line, and that is going to be something they're going to touch on that. But, one, it's more for comedy's sake. Two, I don't think it's going to be as crazy as the first two. I think they're fan servicing by saying they're going to make it R because they don't want to disappoint anyone, but I still think it's going to be a watered down version of Deadpool because I don't think they're going to want to go too crazy. But that's the only example. Everything else in their MCU is very, not like kiddie or anything like that, but not like strictly adult. Whereas DC seems to be going that way. Same with Warner Brothers. If you've watched any of the DC animated films lately, most of them, well, I don't know if I'd say most of them, but many of them are R-rated. And they're extremely violent. And, I'm saying that's a good thing, but, at least they're separating themselves, and at least they're creating their own market that way, which I think is good. That's what they did with the Snyder Cut. They added a lot of violence in there, which was very unexpected, but, it just made it cool. It made the fight scenes a lot better, because, people die in fight scenes. It's cool to see that kind of stuff. So it was surprising and it was very interesting, and they played on that a lot. So I actually really like that. And the same with the animated movies, and the same Warner Brothers is doing that with Mortal Kombat coming up. They're going super gnarly with that. So I think that's the way they should play their movies. That's the way they should do the DCEU. Not saying they all need to be violent, but I'm saying they should go more that adult path, make themselves strictly adult, because that's the only way they're ever going to compete with Marvel. That's what I've said from the beginning, and that's what I think they should do. So that's my thoughts on that. Back to this movie specifically, it's very hard to judge this movie because it's a very weird, peculiar situation. This is something that's never really been done before, because I don't think we've ever really had a re-release of a movie that's been redone to this extent. Yes, we've had movies that have been re-released, and they've been touched up, so to speak, like Star Wars, for example. They re-released those movies, and they added some visual effects, really basic stuff. Didn't change much of anything, just light little touch-ups to make it interesting. So that's the closest we've ever got. Now we have something like this, where almost the entire movie was redone, even though it's not a remake, it's just re-orchestrating the movie. Nothing's ever been done to this extent where they've had a significant amount of budget to re-release a movie. So it's hard to judge this as an isolated film because we have watched the first Justice League. So it's hard to say what my opinion's based on having already seen it once. I constantly thought when I had an opinion about this movie, would I think this if I was just seeing this for the first time? If this was the first one that came out, would I still have this opinion? Because there's so many other factors that affect it. I'll give you an example. Me and my friends have recently started rewatching the whole X-Men franchise, and we just rewatched X-Men 3. I remember when that movie came out, everyone hated it. Everyone was really pissed off because they killed off all the characters, and there's a lot of things they did in that movie that really pissed people off. But, if we had known how that movie was going to play out years later, that they were going to reboot the whole franchise and that Disney and Marvel were going to acquire the property, we might not have been so pissed off about those characters dying, because back then we thought that was the end of the franchise. Now that I've gone back and watched number 3, I actually really like it. And I think that's because I'm not so pissed off about those characters being killed off, because we're so far ahead in the timeline, I kind of know the whole story. That's the same situation with this. I think I had more of an open mind because I've already seen what a bad version of the movie can be. So I guess I have more appreciation for it because I've seen how bad it can get. In the same sense that I appreciated some of these actors that are in it because this may be the last time we ever see them as those characters. I don't think any of these actors are going to come back and do this again because their contracts ended a long time ago, way before this re-release was ever a concept. So I kind of appreciate it a little bit more. A lot of long-winded explanations, but I just wanted to set the tone and get a perspective of where I'm coming from this movie. So that's all cool. And then some minor things to touch on opinion-wise about the movie. I thought it was very odd that it was shot in that 4:3 aspect ratio. You notice at the very beginning it said that it's shot in 4:3 to respect the creative something of Zack Snyder. And it's that was very odd. Why would changing the aspect ratio really affect the creativity of that person, especially since it was already shot in the 16:9 ratio? That was very odd to me, and it was very noticeable when I watched it on certain devices because there's the black bars on the side. So I don't know, not necessarily super bad. It was just an odd thing that kind of bugged me. One thing I really didn't like about it was the CGI was not so great. You could definitely tell that they didn't have as much time or as much budget as they did in the original one, because some of the CGI on the newer stuff was a little bit rough. It wasn't terrible, but it just wasn't great though. It kind of pulled me out of it. For example, Steppenwolf. The design of him looks way cooler. So as far as the design, it looks cool. But I can't say that I like the new design better because the CGI wasn't as good on it. Now, the original design of Steppenwolf, I admit, even when I originally saw it, I didn't really like it. It looked kind of lame, but at least it looked realistic. This new design looks way cooler, and he looks more badass, but this bad CGI kind of takes me out of it and kind of ruins it for me, because that suit was constantly moving and very reflective, and the CGI on it just wasn't super great. So I'd much rather have a bad design that looks realistic versus a great design that looks unrealistic because it just doesn't fit in the movie. And I feel the same way about his voice. They changed his voice, and again, not that it sounds bad, but it's just like overly EQ'd. It's like overly modified, where they took a voice and just did all these crazy effects on it and pitch shifted way down to where it's just like super crazy, deep, low voice, and it's just like, it just sounded weird. It sounded too unnatural to be a voice, and it honestly sometimes made it hard to understand. There was a few times he said something, I'm like, what? I'm sorry, what was that last part? Like, it's like muddled because it's so deep. So I wasn't a big fan of the voice change, and so wasn't a big fan of any of the changes they made for that, because it seemed like a lateral move, honestly, because they could have either put more money into the CGI or just left it the same. I liked the design better, but it wasn't a big enough of a difference to merit the probably millions of dollars they spent to make that change. They could have kept it the same, and I don't think it would have made a huge significant difference on the story. Like, we appreciate the work that went into making him look cooler, but since the CGI was bad, it just seemed kind of like wasted money to me. So I wasn't a huge fan of that. And there was a lot of other parts where the CGI wasn't so great either. Like, I'm really happy Martian Manhunter was in it. Like, he's a cool character, and I'm glad they introduced that. That's really awesome. Like, we got a movie and a new character from a re-release of a movie. That's really cool. But the CGI did not look great. It looked irritating, where it just didn't look realistic, and some of the things from the old version did look realistic, so wasn't a fan of that. And there were just other parts in it too where it just didn't seem to fit very well, so I wasn't a big fan of that. And in this movie, there's just a lot of slow-mo. Now I understand why the movie's 4 hours long, because like half the movie is in slow motion. Every action scene, like every 3 seconds there's a slow-mo scene, and it's like, okay, like, take it easy. I get what you're going for there, but every 5 seconds doesn't need to be dramatic with the slow-mo scene, so they could have toned back on that just a tad. And these are all just minor things. Overall, I will say I like the film. I like the changes they made. I like how they broke it up into pieces, because that just made it easier to understand. I think everyone will agree that one of the main problems of the original cut of the movie was that it was just too rushed. They had 2 hours to set up a whole storyline and all these characters that we're seeing for the first time because they didn't have their own movies. It was just too much to fit into 2 hours, and it was just so many things that were supposed to be deep and thoughtful were just like quick cuts. And this one specifically, like the whole scenes with Amy Adams, like going into how depressed she is, all the regret of losing Clark Kent. Like, it really dives deep into that, because I didn't even think about it, because I watched the Snyder Cut, then went back and watched the regular version, and then watched the Snyder Cut again, because I had to keep going back. It was driving me crazy. So I'm like 10 hours into it. But anyway, when I watched the original version second, I noticed that they just like completely glazed over that. There was like a 30-second little cutscene of it and just like barely touched on it. And there's so much that was just like unexplained. So this got the opportunity to go explain certain things and really make that whole team, when it finally came together, that much more exciting, because there was such a build-up of it. So that was great. I like that. I like that they did that. So again, overall, very good, very positive things. There's still some things that are very vague, though, even still with 4 hours, because I'm sure we all know now that Zack Snyder was supposed to have 3-picture deal, and then they cut it down to 2, and then they cut it down to 1. So now it's like 1.5 movies right here of film that we have, but it was supposed to be more like 8 or 9 with a 3 overall movie, so it feels like it still is cut down, because things like the afterlife equation, they just like barely touched on that. They mentioned it, but they didn't really explain what it is. And I'm sure a lot of people know from the comics or stuff like that, but I was never that much into DC Comics. I like the characters, but I don't know a ton of the lore. I don't know a ton of the history, so I don't really know what the afterlife equation is, and I still don't after watching the movie. And they kind of set it up where Darkseid was in it, which is cool, but he was barely in it, so they kind of ended it where it could lead into something else. They said they have no plans for a future film, but they set it up where it could easily go into another film, so maybe it will. Maybe they will explain the afterlife equation, maybe we will see Darkseid, because that whole extra scene they put at the end, that there was 30 minutes of this dream sequence that kind of led nowhere. I was super excited that Jared Leto was going to be in as Joker, but then he was in just a dream sequence. And I'm kind of hoping that that's foreshadowing, that maybe supposedly it's supposed to be visions of the future, and supposedly in the original cut, that was the second movie. It was all in the future, the Darkseid future, and then they go back in time. So I'm hoping maybe that's what that is. Hopefully that wasn't just a completely pointless scene, that they are somehow going to touch on that, or maybe make a Justice League 2 where it's set in the future before they do the Flashpoint Paradox? Am I saying that right? Before they do that movie, take it back in time and then redo that whole thing. That would be cool. That would make that scene make sense, because if they don't do a Justice League 2, then that was a really pointless scene. That was a really pointless dream sequence that they added on for no reason. It was cool to see Jared Leto, but it was just like, if they don't continue that story, then that was the most pointless thing ever. They spent that money, hired the actors, shot that scene, did all the CGI for nothing. So I can't imagine them not wanting to go somewhere with that, because that was a lot of work for nothing. So maybe that's hinting at them doing Justice League 2, but who knows? It's so up in the air with DC. Who knows? And we can never tell. That's really the only major points that I saw, things that stood out to me. I took a lot of time setting the groundwork to get you in the right mindset, to let you know what I was thinking, and just had some minor things to touch on. Once again, overall, I thought it was very exciting. I liked it. I liked the fight scenes. The fight scenes were way better. I liked that it had more violence. I liked that it had more adult themes. So overall, the best I can say is I like the direction they're headed. That being said, it wasn't mind-blowing. Overall, I'm going to give this movie an 8 out of 10 because I thought it was good. I thought it was worth watching. I enjoyed it. I thoroughly watched the whole thing. I was planning to watch it in parts. Then I was planning to watch just the first 2 hours, and I sat through the whole thing because I just didn't want to turn it off. So that's a good sign. I enjoyed it. But there's so many things that could be done and worked on, and that's what I said about bringing up the X-Men franchise. If they continue this story, that kind of changes things. That may raise the score of this movie over time, because that may increase the enjoyability if I know it's leading somewhere. If this is a complete dead end, then a lot of those scenes were pointless, and that brings down the score of the movie. So this may perhaps be the same thing as X-Men 3, where I go back and watch it later, knowing where the franchise has gone, and now I enjoy it so much more because I know the direction they're going in. So hopefully they follow that path. Hopefully someone at DC is watching this video and they take my advice and stray away from Marvel and go on their own path and do amazing things. That's my hope. That's all I can hope for. Other than that, overall score 8 out of 10. Let me know your thoughts. I set the mood, I set the tone, I gave a quick opinion on it, didn't dive too deep into that because I want to hear yours, and I want to reply, and I want to talk to you in there, and I want you to talk to each other. So let's get that going in the comments, and we'll talk more about it there. Considering how drunk I am, I did pretty good. Not wonderful, but decent. Decent. I didn't pass out or fall over, so that's pretty good. Other than that, we'll see you on the next video, which I know it's going to be another movie one. So this video was released late in the week. Next week's will as well, because it is Kong versus Godzilla. That's going to be dope too, and we will do the exact same thing. Brief little review, and then dive into some conversations between all of us. Thank you all for watching and supporting, and thank you in advance for commenting. Thank you for engaging. Love you all. Peace.